I'd like to invite our panelists to come forward because you want to talk about connecting what Najari has just spoken about to the work that many of us are already engaged in. And as they are coming forward, I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. We are delighted to have with us Dr. Carolina Reid from the University of California at Berkeley, who is really incredibly wise about issues of how the foreclosure crisis impacted particularly poor communities and communities of color. We are also thrilled to have with us Ms. Francine Williams, who is a powerful resident leader in EBHO, and obviously not a stranger to everybody in the room. I say Francine had a lot to do, and many of you in the room, the resident leaders of EBHO, had a lot to do with the fact that we were able to get boomerang funds in the city of Oakland, and we're working on it at the county level as well. Reverend Deb Lee, who is I consider her a sister, as well as one of the most powerful prophetic faith leaders I know, has been working with a church in Oakland who is trying to respond to the trauma and the basic needs, as well as the housing needs of refugee, unaccompanied children and youth who have been coming to this country displaced by the violence of Central America, caused originally by U.S. foreign policy. So it's bringing a different lens to our conversation about displacement. And my brother, the Reverend Theon Johnson, if any of you know anything about Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco, you know that it has been a bastion of fighting the fight against displacement and standing with people on the margins. He's going to be moderating our panel for us this morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good
morning. You hear me?
Yes.
I'm from Mississippi, so I'm used to shouting over yonder. So. What an honor it is to be here, this amazing community of justice seekers, those who are committed to turning the tides on this matter of displacement, housing injustices. And so just by way of beginning to invite you to put your hands together in advance for the amazing gift that we are about to experience through these amazing panelists who come to us from a wealth of experiences and are going to invite us to think more deeply about how we can add our voices and our arms and our hearts and minds to the work of justice. So in advance, I'm going to invite Dr. Carolina to get us going, but the question will be lifted for all of us during this time. I wonder if you might be able to tell us a little bit about what's the most significant and overlooked way in which displacement affects the communities with which you work.
Good morning. So I always get nervous before I present. Even after 20 years of presenting in public spaces, I still get nervous. I have to say that this is the first time that I've had to speak both nervous and so emotionally touched by Mr. Smith's remarks that I just don't even know if I have anything to contribute. He managed to capture everything I wanted to say in a poetic and deeply felt way that I think as academics we often forget and we don't do a good job of sort of conveying. So thank you for that. That was really amazing. It's a good thing that I don't have to use a laser pointer because everybody could see that I'm still shaking. I wanted to point out 3 ways that I think the current moment of gentrification and displacement needs to be understood. The first way is I think we need to see it as a much, can you hear me? Is that better? Sorry. I think we need to see this current moment of displacement within the broader framework of inequality that's plaguing our country as a whole. And there's a very powerful academic by the name of David Harvey who has talked about this moment and as accumulation by dispossession. And by this, he means that wealth and power is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few by explicitly taking from the rest. And if I think about the foreclosure crisis, and I think about what happened in our communities through the foreclosure crisis, I can't think of a better framework for understanding what's happening. That people are getting richer, the people who are coming and buying $800,000 homes in all cash are benefiting from the foreclosures that happened in these communities. And the fact that the 1% now controls 50% of the wealth in this country is what we are seeing at street level in places like Richmond and Oakland. And so I think one of the things I'd like to encourage you all to think about is, yes, we need to fight within our communities, and we need to make sure that we don't allow displacement to happen in our own neighborhoods, but we also have to see this as a national story and a global story, and our voices can help to change that bigger picture as well. The second thing that I want to point out is that I think there's a tendency to see this current housing crisis as a product of the moment, that it's right now, and that the fixes are things that we can do right now, right? Developers just say, we just need to build a little bit more, we need to remove regulations. I'd like to force us to tie the current processes of gentrification and displacement to a much longer historical pattern of exclusion and privilege on the other side. It is not a surprise that the cities and the neighborhoods that are currently gentrifying and suffering from displacement are the same neighborhoods that were previously redlined, that were the same places where we saw the loss of middle-class jobs, where we saw police brutality, where we see all these forces converging. And so having a bigger and longer historical understanding of these trends forces us to recognize that we also need to work for structural change, right? It's not just about building housing units, it's thinking about what produces deeply unequal patterns of racial and class segregation in our cities. The third thing I wanted to say is that we can focus on economic displacement, we can focus on the economics of housing markets, but I think one of the biggest costs of displacement is actually cultural displacement. And the fact that when we see people moving into our communities, they are coming with different ideas about what architecture should be, what communities should be, and they don't recognize that these communities have really strong social ties. They have deep histories, they have norms, they have community, they have assets. And I think it's particularly pernicious that the current moment, this gentrification is very closely accompanied by commodification, right? It's the emergence of the Pilates studio, the fancy donut shop, and that forgets what community is really about. Community is not about commodity. It's about social ties. It's about history. It's about family. And so I think that that to me is one of the underappreciated moments of displacement.
Good morning, everyone. I think that Carolyn has said quite a mouthful. I totally agree with her because there is a pattern. When I think about how displacement has affected my community, I think about the many faces of displacement that I see every day, the many voices of displacement that I hear every day. And most of the stories they're heart-wrenching. Wednesday night, I was there with many others at City Hall in Oakland, where we had a housing road mapping. The people that stepped forward, there were some 87 of them who simply wanted to say their piece to the city. The stories were of how the landlords were trying to force them out because they wanted the higher rents. There was a story of a man who they managed to get him out of his residence and displace him. And he said that his place had now gone from, I think he had been paying something like $800 or $900 a month. And then the new place, they spruced it up a bit, and now it's going for $1,700. There was a story there of a woman who had come to the city council over a year ago asking for their assistance with a place where she was living that was substandard. And she had 2 little girls, and she wanted their help. Now she's back before the city council, and now she's being displaced. And she brought her 2 little girls. And they told of the story that the house they lived in, the nails were coming up and it hurt her feet. There was the story of the young man who stood up and said he was a lifetime Oaklander. And he see the new people coming into the neighborhood. He was from West Oakland. And he said, these new people, they're coming, and they don't understand we have a community here. So I find that it's affecting us. There are some unseen factors and many seen factors. It goes deep. And that's why I stand to do the volunteering that I do. Thank you.
Well, what I hear really being lifted up is the sacredness of place, the sacredness of land and the sacredness of place. And I remember when I first moved here from Ohio to the Bay Area, my grandmother's in San Francisco, and Chinatown in San Francisco was a really sacred place, and it still is. To me, it's like the Catholic Church. You know, like Catholics, you can go into a church anywhere, and that's home. And for me, it's Chinatown. So I think about how important, not just Chinatown, but so many other social communities that have that other value that's not monetized, and it's not functional, but it's the part that nourishes our soul. It's the cultural reproduction. I'm here actually filling in for Reverend Pablo Morataya, who's the pastor of Primera Iglesia Hispana on High Street. He was not able to be here, but I've been working closely with him to respond to the migrant children and migrant family crisis that has been actually going on for a number of years, but really spiked last year when we saw every 2 weeks 100 people, immigrant detainees, being brought into the Richmond Detention Center because they were arriving at the border and they didn't have enough places at the border to hold them. When we saw, you know, Oakland Unified School District, I heard now has 500 newly arrived kids from last year to this beginning of this school year, fleeing violence, trying to be reunited with family members who are here already in the United States. So Pastor Morataya's congregation on High Street was ground zero. They were a place, if you can imagine, you're coming from another country, fleeing with very little, being displaced. One of the places that you know the government doesn't want you there. You've already been labeled an illegal person in that country. You might go to a church, or you might go to a synagogue, or you might go to a temple, or you might go to where someone speaks your language, or someone from your home country is. And so that's what he found his congregation being. So his congregation has enlisted the support of many other congregations, and we've been working with him to create a network of faith communities that can respond to the crisis within a crisis. We know we have a larger affordable housing crisis, but the crisis for migrant folks is a crisis within that. Because when they're here, they're facing a deportation hearing. They're legally not allowed to work. They cannot qualify for public assistance of any kind. They cannot afford, they cannot, apply for Section 8 or anything else. So they are really here at the mercy of folks like the faith community who can support them in their quest to find a safe home.
Wait 1 minute.
Are y'all, can I say y'all here? Yeah. Are y'all suggesting that community is more than a commodity? Because I heard something like that from all of y'all. I'm just trying to make sure I'm hearing you right. That community is more than a commodity. That human dignity is worth more than our talk about affordability. All right, well, okay, I guess I'll go with that. With that said, as we think about community and these places where so many of our more marginal members of our communities may gather in their fight for, their struggle for justice, to be heard, to be seen, to feel safe, to have their humanity affirmed. We have, as you mentioned, Rev, faith communities, which are a very important part of so many of our communities across the spectrum of faith and spirituality. And so I'm wondering, in that spirit, what can faith communities, I'd love to hear from all of you, what can faith communities do in their work towards ending displacement?
Well, generally speaking, we need to be organizing. We need to have our voices out there. We need to have our congregations mobilize that this is a bigger national issue, and this is an issue about priorities. This is an issue about how our sacred common good is shared, how it supports life for everyone. I want to just share, particularly around the migrant crisis that I was speaking to. We have been, we're not the only ones where the migrant crisis is appearing. We're having our own internal migration crisis in the United States, right? Of people having to move to Antioch or further out, Stockton. So, for us, we've been taking a look at what's happening in Europe, and I think if those of you who've seen the Icelanders saying, we will take 10,000 homes, so they'd be willing to take someone. Pope Francis asking every parish, every congregation to accept 1 or 2 families. So my question is, could we do that here? Why couldn't we do that here? We have a lot of faith communities that have very underutilized spaces and buildings during the week. And what would it mean to extend radical hospitality to a family in need? To have a room dedicated at any time for somebody in need, whether that be a newly arrived person or a long-term resident. But I think that there's so many gifts in hospitality that we don't realize sometimes that actually it is the host who is transformed the most. And I think if we close ourselves off to that, we're actually closing ourselves off to a powerful opportunity to experience God or the divine through the face of the neighbor.
So I would add my voice to continue organizing the way you are. Capital money is power. There's a lot of people who are arguing against things like inclusionary zoning, against rent control, against other ordinances that keep communities together. The more voices we have arguing for those policies, the better. So voice can be a powerful force for change. I would also say that from my perspective, the faith community is uniquely positioned to think about what community is and help us move towards communities that celebrate diversity and difference, as opposed to the current process, which I think pushes communities towards sameness. And particularly in California, where we have this incredibly rich, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-religious, multi-age society, how do we celebrate that, and how do we make that still a community despite those differences, or maybe even in celebration of those differences? And I think the faith-based community can create spaces for that type of dialogue and community to be built.
Thank you. When I think about the faith community being involved with the housing justice, I think about, there's a parable in the Bible that talks about the Good Samaritan. That Samaritan was wounded and was thrown to the streets. And there were others who walked past him who could have helped but didn't. But there was one that did. And he was without a home at that point. And he placed the man on the horse and had him taken to the nearest hotel, and he paid the bill. So I'm thinking about in all of the faith community, there is a story where there is a foundation for helping others. So I think the primary thing to me is that we must provide an education. We must help the faith community make their members aware of the injustices and how they can help. And then the faith community can open its doors and allow us to work together.
These women are on it. Maybe I can take a liberty and add to that. Well, there's something in line with that idea of blessing, right, that comes from looking in the eye of the other and then seeing myself in the other. I imagine if that might be one of the most challenging parts, especially as we think about our neighbors who may be homeless among us, right? For me to stop and look at you long enough might open myself to experience homelessness in that moment, or at least my connection to it. And my connection might not be a direct sleeping next door to you, but it might be that, you know what? I am one paycheck away. Hello, somebody. One paycheck away from being right next to you. And so the gift, right, of seeing myself in the other comes alive anew, and we are willing to make space to stop and celebrate each other's diversity and to hear each other into speech. With that in mind, I'm wondering, what does beloved community look like to you? What does it look like to have communities that do not face displacement, and how can we who are here, we, this audience, justice seekers and community activists, elected leaders, be those persons who participate in that work? How about we go down to...
Well, when I think about that question, it's pretty loaded. But I think about, we first must start with the vision that you've laid forth. A place where no one's displaced. We must speak the vision first, and then we can lay it out and make it plain. And I believe that the more people that grab a hold to the vision that no one should be displaced, nobody should be homeless, and I'm going to do something about it to see the vision come to pass. So once we pass that vision along, as others catch it, it can be made so. And that's mine.
So mine's exactly the same, but with a slightly different twist that I have to put my little academic hat on. For me, it's when housing becomes a right, right? When it's no longer about the capital that goes with housing, but where really it is a right. And I do not think that this is the unattainable beloved community. So I'm originally Dutch, which means I come from the Netherlands. And the Netherlands has had a right to housing since 1901, right? Which means, and I don't want to say that everything in the Netherlands is perfect, because it's not. There's racism, there's inequality, there's all the same things we struggle with here. But every single person in Holland has the right to a housing subsidy, right? So in the United States, we only provide housing subsidies for 1 in 4 people who are eligible for them. In Holland, that goes to 100% of the people. The entire country is under rent stabilization, right? So no apartment owner can raise those rents to a level that's unsustainable for families. And if you lose your housing, you can go to any government office and they have to provide you with shelter that evening. Even if it's only in a 5-star hotel, right? They have the legal obligation, and as a citizen, you have the right to make claims against the government to that right. And this is a country that's not that different from us in terms of its economic status, right? It's the issues it's dealing with. And so for me, housing is ultimately fundamental to a just, sustainable society, and I think we need to invest in it as that platform.
Outline exactly what we should be organizing for. Thank you so much. I guess in terms of my vision for beloved community comes from scripture, Isaiah 65. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. They will not labor in vain, nor will they bear children doomed to misfortune. For they will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. So besides housing being a right, I feel like our fundamental relationship to the land has to change. It is not something to be owned and possessed and to be mine. So it's a real change. And I feel like I've become more and more sensitized to the ways that we are a settler nation. Whether some of us came by choice and some of us did not come by choice, but none of us, most of us, are not indigenous. And when we wake up every morning, whatever house, hopefully, whatever home we have to recognize whose land that's sitting on and where are they. And so I think that part of our reconciliation with that fact, that horrible fact that we live with and live with, is saying that we've got to change our relationship with how we see land use, but that it has to be not mine, something that I own or that I might pass on to my children. It's not mine, but this is ours. This is the Alameda County or the city of Richmond. And how do we use our land in a way that supports all of our people, that supports our future, that supports life?
In the spirit of the latter part of that question, how we who are here participate in this work of building a beloved community. There are words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I want to leave us with. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. May we who are here be those who history will look back upon and say, aha, oh yeah. They'll say, oh yeah. I won't say oh yeah, but oh yeah. Oh yeah. In 2015, there was a group of folks, rabble-rousers, who gathered in Richmond. Rabble-rousers from Richmond, who dared to believe in the inevitable, who dared to believe that everyone had a place that they could call home and that we were part of helping to bring that vision to pass. So I'm excited for this time, for the knowledge, for the gift of this panel, and would ask, as I did in advance, that you would now be able to celebrate that through what you've heard. Come on, give it up. It was amazing.